Hello, just showing off some footage of my temporal upscaling solution. It's like temporal anti-aliasing, except for each pixel that you draw is blitted onto a super resolution texture. So in my case, my screen is 1440p, but I'm blitting onto this texture that's 2 times in either axis bigger, so in total 4 times bigger. And so the image is pretty sharp. I'm just curious how it looks coming over video. See how it looks in MP4 file format. So the scene that I'm currently using has 0 textures. Everything is polygons. And I've got like a plastic look on everything, including this slide. Because plastic generally tends to shine, and especially for foliage, if you have like a plastic tree, you're going to have lots of sharp little white highlights. And you'll kind of see it like down there. I can kind of zoom in here. It's got the sharp highlights around these little branches, which is pretty cool. And it looks really stable as long as I have temporal anti-aliasing. And specifically what I'm doing is a mixture of my temporal anti-aliasing 2 times on the x-axis and 2 times on the y-axis, as well as MSAA, 4 times MSAA. So if I disable MSAA, it gets jitterier, and if I kind of set the temporal upsampling to do nothing, then that's how it looks. And it's a lot noisier. It's going to not show up on MP4 files and YouTube videos as well. You'll notice the compression artifacts get awfuler and awfuler because the video stream is working really hard to show all the high frequency updates for all the aliasing effects, which are not desired. They're artifacts. Instead of the MP4 file more so spending bandwidth on higher level constructs like showing the tree in its entirety or other parts of the scene. Most of the MP4 bandwidth is going to be used up, I think, on just showing undesirable anti-aliasing aliasing artifacts. So we'll re-enable it. If I were to go to kind of the ultra mode, that is when you do 4x4 temporal supersampling. So it doesn't do great things for the frame rate, but you are then blitting your 1440p render onto a 4x4 super resolution texture, so it's massive. It's 16 times greater. It's a massive texture. So the shader becomes very expensive, and there's also kind of smearing artifacts that you can start seeing if you move really quickly. I'm very surprised with how little smearing is visible, considering how much noise there is. It's actually quite pleasing how little smearing there is. You'd be hard pressed to pick out any sort of trailing between a tree and the sky. So it actually works quite well, considering that data over 16 frames is being accumulated together to form the final image. And the main benefit is that aliasing becomes a complete thing of the past. There is absolutely 0 aliasing. Almost. It's as if you had an 8K image. Or it's as if you had a 10K image. This is basically 10K. So it's a sight to behold, 10K. It looks very nice. This is zoomed in 5 times, and I can't see any temporal aliasing. almost. There's a couple of regions, maybe you can see it, but you'd be really hard pressed to find it. So this is pretty incredible. I don't expect people will run in this mode a lot. Like, I want to make a game off of this. I've got the scene going on, and I'd like to keep growing the scene. And given that I have this really nuanced anti-aliasing solution, I can then throw in like really naive models that are really high in triangle count and poly count, but they're highly detailed and can have really accurate specular effects. So if I'm making like something where things are really shiny and wet or plasticky or metally, and like have all those high frequency details actually show up in the sub-pixel level, that'll just look really good. And the art pipeline for that becomes a lot simpler because I'm not having to art textures for individual models. I can just make the real geometry in triangles and do that instead. So that can be applied to ground textures where, instead of adding texture across the ground, you draw the individual pebbles. Grass has individual blades. And a lot of that stuff will end up being like generated using tessellation effects, geometry shaders, that kind of thing, which you can do, I think, in Unity. And it'll generate all these crazy, sub-pixel details that would look awful without anti-aliasing. But because I have what I would consider to be the best anti-aliasing solution I know of, to compete alongside DLSS, I suppose, then, the fact that I don't have textures is still good. And hopefully, because modern graphics cards can generally render surprisingly more polys than you'd expect of it, because generally games are more limited by fill rate, then hopefully you can just have tons and tons of more triangles than you'd expect in a normal game to be rendered using this method. So we'll see. We'll see how the footage shows up. This is kind of a late video. Everyone's asleep at the house, so we're keeping it low key, but I'm pretty excited about it so far, and I think there's potential here for something. And of course, if I get hired to do a job, I'm gonna drop this, but we'll keep working on it while I have the free time to work on it and see where it leads us. So that is all for today.